And since the changes away from Glass-Steagall resulted in a cumulative destruction of the ability of the United States to function as a
Lyndon
nation.
LaRouche's July 5th remarks on defining the true meaning of a Glass-Steagall economic system couldn't have come at a better time. Our world at present stands on thin ice, with an obvious food shortage looming and reports of over half of the American labor force underemployed or unemployed. The average American lives under hideous conditions that threaten to get worse. In times like these, only big ideas will work. The idea of credit, as conceived by our first Treasury Secretary, Alexander Hamilton. It is precisely for this reason, to fight for the full meaning of a Glass-Steagall orientation, that Lyndon LaRouche's associates of the Policy Committee will be convening in Washington, D.C. this coming week. The task before them and the suffering American population as a whole is to challenge the Congress to take up the full identity of Glass-Steagall as Roosevelt used it to reaffirm the authority of the preamble of the U.S. Constitution and the outlook of credit which Hamilton established at the founding of this nation. LaRouche PAC in Action found themselves this week taking that message across the nation and on Capitol Hill. No sooner did we witness the need to upshift the discussion to the issue of credit as Senators Elizabeth Warren, John McCain, and others introduced the 21st century Glass-Steagall bill. Many have seen its introduction immediately publicized by major media outlets. However, without the adoption of what the Policy Committee will be bringing into Washington this week, the Hamilton implementation of banking, the efforts of the Congress threaten to compromise with your mortal enemy, Wall Street. First in LaRouche PAC in Action this week, Michael Kirsch of LaRouche's science team continued to elaborate the historical concept of the U.S. credit system with a presentation recorded for the American population.
Just the character, the true nature of the credit system, how it's intertwined with the sovereign nation state itself. That you don't have a nation without a credit system. You don't have a government without a credit system. And that's why right now the failure to understand what a credit system is, and especially the fact that this is the American credit system, it means that we're really almost returning back into colonial status and, frankly, just feudalism, that you don't have nation states at all unless you have a credit system. So,
take the example of the U.S. and global food supply. Without a full reorganization of the global financial system, no amount of reforms or repeals will guarantee us a stable world food supply. Food crises are part of the current system itself. The credit isn't there to back up food production in terms of investments into water management and maintaining farmland, because the production of food isn't the purpose of the current economic paradigm.
Let's begin with a snapshot of the world food and national food crisis, and we'll summarize it by putting all together on a per-person basis the volume of grain output in the last, since the Second World War. And let me just say simply this. We were going upward in the volume of grain produced per person in the world from after the war till about 1980, 1985. We went from a miserable quarter of a ton maybe to up to maybe 720 pounds. A quarter of a ton up to 720 pounds, which isn't much per person. It would fit in the back of a small pickup truck. But it was on the rise. From the 1980s to now, total world grains per person has gone up and down, and in net, it is going down. Now, you know that apart from those in the 30s who survived on cornmeal 3 times a day, and we're lucky here, you need the grain, too, for livestock, for meat animals. It's all going in reverse. The number of cattle in the United States is now where it was back in 1952. The same process is taking place elsewhere. And let's look at the geography of the world food situation. you know that due to what was described by Helga Zepp-LaRouche as the criminal system in the world, who eats and who doesn't is decided by cartels, used to be called by a pope the structures of sin. The darkest places on this map from the Food and Agriculture Organization in the world are the places of worst hunger and worst deprivation. You see Africa, but parts of the Americas, Haiti, Central America, and in Asia. And I'll tell you, it's not, in addition, you hear if there's maybe an earthquake somewhere, we send some food, we should. But on a tonnage basis internationally, the volume of food aid right now is nothing. It's maybe a third what it was in the 1990s, which was inadequate. So we're not responding and we don't have it. That's the snapshot. So this is a death sentence. You can quantify it, by the way, of course, that if you're impoverishing the World Health Organization figures that for every 1 million people that are pushed into poverty, at least, this sounds low, but don't get confused, 6,000 absolutely are guaranteed to die from undernourishment, disease, and infection. And so we're killing about 250,000 people a year directly because of the impoverishment of suppressing agriculture and general economic activity for this false quack, pseudoscientific reason that we're supposed to quit overheating the earth.
Now this is grain inventory. At the end of each year, we have what they call a carryover of grain into the next year. And the latest that we actually have the figures for is the year 2011. See, because you have to go around through the whole year. It's kind of like the rainfall records. You know, you got to go around through into the next year before you can come up with a total figure. And the carryover in terms of consumption represents 37.68 days supply. That's all we have. That's all we have left over at the end of the year. Now, if you'll note that was in 2011. This is not taking in 2012 yet. Now, 2012, that hasn't come around yet, the full crop year, that represents the drought year in the Midwest. So that figure, I think, will probably be cut in half when heaven forbid if we have another drought in the Midwest. We're dangerously close in this country, and food security is a real concern.
What in the present Wall Street-dominated economy adds to the threatening of the U.S. food supply? Ethanol. Food for the engines, not for the people. Last week, we reported on the just-published ethanol fact sheet titled, "The Ethanol Mandate Has Already Killed Millions." This week, we took that briefing into the Congress and had a series of meetings with Democrats and Republicans. Each office we met with took the full briefing on how close we are across the board to zero food reserves. However, when it came to the effect the ethanol industry has and is having throughout the world, staffers were stunned. None of the offices had ever seen the World Health Organization's figures that nearly 250,000 people die each year due to the amount of food stocks that are being converted into ethanol. We told the offices that they shouldn't expect whatever momentum is building to repeal Obama's renewable fuel standard, which currently mandates 40% of all U.S. corn production to be converted into ethanol, to actually be effective if they weren't going to come out strong and call it what it is: genocide. Typical of the dysfunctionality of the Congress, even after spelling out the facts that illustrate the intention of the policy, aides told us that while they personally want everyone to have food, some offices only want to reform the renewable fuel standard, not repeal it entirely. Other staffers who were less compromised said that they had never had anyone present the material in this way and were quite shocked. To reverse, ultimately, the trend of genocide through starvation lies in the fight to understand and implement the full credit system which must come with Glass-Steagall.
To be industrious, that was equivalent. The right to go into debt, the right to be industrious, the right to improve your labor. This is why also the credit system is part of the Constitution, because you can't actually uphold equal rights if you don't have a credit system, because you don't create in the means for people to move forward. If you don't have credit and you just have a money system, it's basically keeping people fixed, because they don't have the means to go into debt.
2 days prior to the introduction of Warren and McCain's 21st Century Glass-Steagall bill, LaRouche PAC organizers were on the ground in D.C. pressing the Congress on the issue of a Hamiltonian system.
Hello, this is Alicia Saratani reporting from Washington, D.C. After 2 intensive days of organizing here on Capitol Hill, bringing Mr. LaRouche's message from Monday's Policy Committee report, I just want to give a preliminary report to some of the reactions that we got from what Mr. LaRouche has been saying, specifically about a credit system. And that message, if you've watched the Policy Committee, if you watched last Friday's webcast, is that even if the United States were to pass Glass-Steagall, if the Congress were to restore Glass-Steagall, America without a credit system is not going to function. We need something that is going to replace Wall Street and replace the City of London's global influence. And we can do that with the U.S. credit system. So some of the responses that we were getting from people who were visiting D.C., different lobbyists, were very interesting. And they reflect the point that I began this report with, which is that people know another crash is coming. People know that Congress isn't doing everything in their constitutional power to save the United States economy from financial interests. So we had several members of the financial services industry march up to us. One in particular, who is in the securities industry, march right up to us, give us his card and say, I work with these guys, I know these guys, I work in this industry. The repeal of Glass-Steagall was the worst thing that we ever did. Now, something else that was very indicative of the mood of the population is someone from California who walked up. They're here on business to see their congressperson, and they said, look, you don't understand how bad it is in this country. I'm from California. California is going to be the next Greece. The state is bankrupt. And so California goes, the rest of the nation will go. And we had a very frank discussion with this person on what a recovery would look like. Another interesting factor of the last week here is that the American Farm Bureau presidents are here in Washington, D.C. They're visiting their congresspeople, many of whom we've presented the North American Water and Power Alliance project to. So they get to see us in action in Washington, D.C. We got them the updated platform. And they also are confronted with what side of history do they want to be on with Glass-Steagall. This is largely a conservative organization, but they also understand that their biggest competing interests is international finance, that you're not going to have the infrastructure that you need for a thriving agricultural sector unless you get your financial house in order. So it was very fun to intersect some of these guys and for them to see us in action. Now, as I said before, the U.S. Congress has a long way to go before they understand the U.S. credit system as Mr. LaRouche is laying out right now, as do many American people. But honestly, as fed up as the American people are, as frustrating as it is to be a congressperson right now with Obama as the U.S. president, the fact of the matter is people should not take for granted that this nation was founded on the principles of creating an authority strong enough, united enough, to assert its sovereignty over a system of empire. That's still our task at hand today. And there will be forthcoming material from Michael Keir, some of the work that he's been doing on the history of the credit system, which really is a history of the formation of the Constitution of the United States and a history of the founding of the U.S. Capitol and the 3 branches of government. If the American people know this history, then they're going to understand that the federal government is one of the best tools that we have. If you can educate your congressperson on that and get them to realize, forget factionalizations, what we need to do with the Congress is assert our sovereignty over financial interests, impeach the president, exercise your constitutional authority to impeach this president, then we have the platform. Then the American people know how to put the country back together. But we can't do it if the Congress and the federal government is not asserting its sovereign right, which we've worked for 2 centuries to create. So look for this material.
In preparation for the LaRouche PAC Policy Committee's intervention into D.C., former congressional candidate Rachel Brown, who challenged bailout Barney Frank's 4th District, intervened into the Massachusetts Democratic State Convention with these concepts.
Hi, I'm Rachel Brown. I'm out here at the Massachusetts Democratic Convention, where we're gathering signatures for a petition entitled Glass-Steagall is just the beginning. We need a full Franklin Roosevelt program. And what we're finding the most response for is, number one, Hamiltonian credit system. We're distributing this leaflet, Hamiltonian credit increasing the productivity of man, and saying that the urgency for action now is not just about re-regulating the banks, but about the complete economic breakdown. And we're finding massive amounts of support when people get a sense of our passion for, number one, actually taking on Wall Street, not just in name, but in regaining the entire system of American economy. And two, in our passion to get Congress to do this now. That Congress should not go on recess in the month of August without taking emergency measures on the economy now. If you look at what's happening in farming, unemployment, the rebuilding of our destroyed sectors of the nation, this stuff needs to be done now. Not in 5 years, not in 2 years. We've got to do this with the spirit and leadership that we saw from Franklin Roosevelt. And so we've been getting out these pamphlets, getting out the platform. We've had elected officials coming back and saying, I need one of those for my job, I need to study this. We had one lady who's said her son is studying politics at a university, and this is exactly what he's looking into, is how we have a full program for the entire economy. So besides Glass-Steagall, which is on everybody's minds, we're pushing this thing to the bigger question of the credit system that has to go with it, and finding the most response on that idea of a complete solution. So I'm Rachel Brown, a Democrat for Congress, and the main thrust of my campaign right now represents a fight to restore Glass-Steagall and to impeach Obama.
Rachel Brown's first congressional campaign in 2010 challenged Massachusetts politics to take up Glass-Steagall as a fundamental issue for the country. Massachusetts was saturated by her campaign with that policy, which is now being called for publicly 3 years later by the senator of that state and others. Now, not only is Rachel Brown being brought into D.C. to escalate the fight for the full intention of the Franklin Roosevelt policy, but so is the entire policy committee team to challenge the House and the Senate with the initiative for the credit system led by Lyndon LaRouche. What you can do to take part in this fight is call the 1-800 number provided below to provide us with the resources needed to wage this fight, but also to coordinate calling your federal representatives and demand that they meet with the members of the policy committee on the matter of going beyond Glass-Steagall. Be active in this fight. There are patriots still in this country, but no one else is pulling together the best of the best for total victory.